The twilight horizon glowed with a burning ember of orange and purple, the dying sun silhouetting the towering pines that bordered the small frontier town of Willow Creek. A faint tang of wood smoke rode the cooling air, and a dusting of frost already silvered the grass in the hollows. It was a picturesque scene that belied the tension coiled tighter than a rattlesnake ready to strike within the wooden frame of the one-room schoolhouse. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore struggled against the rough ropes binding her wrists. The ropes chafed her skin raw, the coarse fibers cutting into tender flesh with every futile twist of her hands. Her fingers had gone numb, then prickly, as blood fought to reach them again. A bitter mix of chalk dust and old ink hung in the air, the familiar sense of her classroom now turned sour by fear. Her mind raced frantically for a way out, but the stifling air was thick with panic, threatening to suffocate her as much as hold her captive. "Sheriff Reed," Eleanor shouted, her voice echoing through the empty room, bouncing off the slate blackboard and rows of empty desks. The sound came back to her warped and lonely, swallowed by silence and the distant howling of the wind sliding under the door. Her only reply was the mocking laughter of solitude. How had it come to this? A respected schoolteacher in chains, accused of a crime she didn't commit, the murder of her own kin. Her brother's laugh flickered across her mind, the remembered warmth of his hand steadying her when she'd first stepped off the stagecoach into Willow Creek. The thought of his body left cold and still made her stomach twist. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, furious tears burning. But this was Willow Creek, under the watch of Sheriff Colin Reed, a lawman whose self-righteous guise masked a sinister tyranny. Eleanor had dared defy him, questioned his ruthless judgment in front of half the town when he'd whipped a boy for stealing bread. For that, she now faced a noose crafted from lies and deceit. As despair nipped at her, there was a shuffling near the back door, a soft scuff of boots on worn floorboards beneath the whisper of the wind. Heart pounding, Eleanor's head jerked up. She strained to see through the encroaching darkness, every nerve drawn thin as fiddle wire, expecting another of Reed's men. Instead, a shadow detached itself from the inky blackness, moving with the stealth of a panther. Her breath caught, the air freezing halfway to her lungs. It couldn't be, yet it was. "Hold still," a deep voice commanded, low and familiar, like the roll of distant thunder over the plains. The sound slid through her like a memory long buried. Within moments, the ropes fell away, the coarse fibers loosening, then dropping to the floor with a soft, final thud. Eleanor hissed as blood surged back into her hands, a hot, painful tingling. She rubbed her raw wrists, the skin angry and abraded, feeling the fragile warmth already returning to her fingers. There he stood, Caleb Rourke, the infamous outlaw, supposedly vanished years ago after a string of bank robberies and narrow escapes. The lamplight from the single window caught on the dust clinging to his coat and the faint silvering at his temples. He looked carved from the same hard earth as the canyon cliffs, yet there was a weariness about the set of his shoulders that tugged at something deep inside her. "Caleb," she whispered, a mix of relief and disbelief coursing through her veins, making her limbs tremble. His name tasted strange and familiar on her tongue, like a prayer she hadn't meant to say out loud. What was he doing here? Her savior had come dressed in the guise of an outlaw. Eleanor's heart beat a wild tattoo against her ribs. Caleb's presence was both a balm and a bandage to her wounded spirit. Once, years ago, he had sat at the back of this very room, hat pushed low, listening to her read to the children as if he had no right to be there and yet couldn't stay away. She saw him watching her now, his storm gray eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his worn hat. Something haunted flickered there. Recognition, regret, and something she didn't dare name. "We need to get out of here," Caleb said, his voice a rasp against the tension that hung in the air. It was rough-hewn, like gravel over river rock, yet threaded with an unexpected gentleness when he spoke to her. There was something in his gaze, something pulling her with a magnetic force, as if the years between them had been nothing more than a breath held too long. "Why are you helping me?" Eleanor asked, the question slipping free before she could stop it. It hung like dew in the chilled air, fragile and bright. "Because once I needed help, and someone believed in me when no one else would. I reckon it's time I returned the favor." There was an edge of vulnerability in his words, a crack in the hardened exterior that hinted at past wounds. His throat worked, as if the admission cost him. The schoolhouse groaned against the evening wind, the sound like a troubled soul whispering secrets through the gaps in the boards. A strand of Eleanor's hair, loosed from its pins, brushed her cheek. Caleb's hand lifted as if to tuck it back, then halted. Instead, as he guided her toward the door, his fingers brushed hers, a brief accidental touch that sparked warmth through Eleanor's chilled bones and set her pulse racing anew. His skin was calloused and warm, the contact jolting her as surely as if she'd touched live fire. He was warmth in that cold room, his presence a shelter amidst the storm. They moved cautiously through the town, sticking to the back alleys where shadows melded into one another, and the ground was littered with broken glass and old, forgotten hopes. The scent of wood smoke clung to the air, mingling with the sharp tang of coal oil and the faint bite of frost heralding an early winter. Dogs barked somewhere far off, and a door slammed, the sound echoing down the narrow lane. Caleb guided her with a gentle firmness, his touch at her elbow steady and sure, a silent pledge of protection. Each time his fingers tightened to steer her away from a loose board or a rut in the ground, her awareness of him sharpened. The leather of his glove was worn soft with use, the pressure through the thin fabric of her sleeve strangely intimate. She found herself leaning just slightly into that support. In the safety of the old barn on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes, Eleanor finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The dusty air was filled with the dry scent of hay and the earthy musk of horses grounding in its familiarity. A lantern hung from a peg, its small flame barely chasing away the shadows pooling in the corners. Dust motes drifted lazily through the light, rising and falling like quiet prayers. She sank down on an overturned crate, her legs suddenly unsteady. Caleb moved with practiced ease among the stalls, soothing a restless mare with a quiet murmur and a steady hand on her neck. The soft snort of the horse and the creak of leather harness were the only sounds for a heartbeat. "Reed says I killed my brother, Caleb. I didn't, but he's convinced folks with his lies," Eleanor confessed, her voice cracking like ice underfoot. The words tasted of ash, scraping their way out of her raw throat. He died in my arms. I can still feel how cold he was getting. And Reed," her breath hitched. She pressed her trembling hands together to still them. "You didn't have to tell me. I know you didn't," said Caleb, hauling a bale of hay in front of her to sit. His voice, rough and steady, wrapped around her like a wool blanket. He lowered himself onto the hay, the faint rustle underscoring the gravity of his words. His acceptance washed over her like a gentle rain, softening the hardened edges of fear that pinched at her heart. How? Her throat ached with the need to understand, to cling to the small, stubborn ember of hope his certainty offered. "Why?" she asked again, quieter this time, needing to understand the motive behind his unexpected assistance. He leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees, the lantern light carving shadows into the planes of his face. "Because Reed framed me too. I've gathered proof, but to clear both our names, we need to find it. He's kept this town under his thumb by using folks like us as scapegoats," Caleb explained, the roughness of his voice softening in the dim light of the lantern he now lit. The faint sulfur smell of the match flared, then faded, giving way to the warm, slightly smoky aroma of burning oil. Eleanor shivered, not from the cold, but from the enormity of the revelation. Their stories, once running parallel and separate, now tangled together. They were joined by the threads of injustice, their destinies as entwined as the creeping tendrils of old vines overtaking a fence post. Almost without thinking, she rubbed at her wrists again. Caleb's eyes followed the motion, a muscle in his jaw tightened. He reached out slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. "Let me see," he murmured. She hesitated, breath catching, then turned her hands outward. His fingers closed gently around her wrists, turning them toward the light. The heat of his touch seeped into her bruised skin. He handled her as if she were something breakable, and that tenderness threatened to undo her altogether. "We'll get salve on these," he said quietly. "Can't have Willow Creek's schoolmarm walking around looking like she lost a fight with a wildcat." There was a ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth when he said it, and for the first time that night, something like a laugh trembled in her chest. It came out as a strangled breath instead, but it eased the tightness in her lungs. When he finally released her, her skin felt cool in the absence of his hands. As they shared bread and cheese by the flickering lantern, Caleb's presence was a comforting shadow at her side. The bread was dry and a little stale, the cheese sharp on her tongue, but the simple act of chewing steadied her. Caleb sliced the food with a careful hand, passing her the larger portion without comment. Their shoulders brushed now and then, cloth rasping against cloth, each contact sending an answering thrill down her spine. Their hands brushed frequently while sorting hay for the horses, fingers tangling for a split second in the same handful of straw. Each incidental contact lit embers that refused to be ignored, small sparks against the chill of the barn. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of everything about him, the way the leather of his coat creaked when he moved, the faint scent of horse, gun oil, and crushed sage that clung to him, the low hum he gave in the back of his throat when a horse settled. Yet words felt clumsy against the eloquence of the silence they shared. There was comfort in the soft noises of work, The rustle of hay, the horses' contented chewing, the occasional creak of the barn rafters above. In that quiet, their unspoken fears were louder, but so was the fragile warmth of trust that had begun to take root. Both understood the burn of betrayal, the chill of unspoken fears, and the warmth of hope kindled in the company of a trusted ally. Later, when the horses were bedded down and the lantern's flame had burned low, Caleb fetched an old tin of salve from a peg. He tilted his head toward the crate. "Sit," he said, softer now. "This'll sting some." She did as told. The salve smelled sharply of pine and something medicinal. When he took her wrists again and smoothed the cool ointment over the chafed skin with careful, calloused fingers, she had to fight the urge to close her eyes. The contrast of cool salve and warm hands set her senses humming. Her breath fanned against his cheek, and his went shallow for a heartbeat before he tamped it down. They worked through the night, the moon a silent witness to their resolve, its pale light filtering through the barn's gaps, banding the packed dirt floor in silver. Before the first blush of dawn, Caleb lifted his chin, a subtle gesture towards the stack of horseshoes in the corner. "Can I trust you to keep a secret, Eleanor?" Her fingers tightened around the crust of bread she hadn't quite finished. Trust, after all that had happened, was no small word. Yet as she looked at him, at the lines carved by sun and hardship, at the vulnerability he tried to hide, she heard her own answer before she spoke it. "Always," she promised, willing the trust to run both ways. Her voice was steady, surprising her. "I've been hiding the key evidence, ledgers, proving Reed's crimes behind those. But now, we need a plan." The weight of his confession sank into the depth of their shared understanding. Caleb, the outlaw, was no saint, and yet here they were, partners poised against the world's injustice. She thought of the stories whispered about him over coffee and cornbread at Miss May's boarding house, of mothers pulling their children closer when his name was mentioned. Sitting beside him now, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes, she knew how many of those tales had been shaped to fit Reed's cruel needs. Willow Creek was a town of whispers, its dirt-streaked streets home to eyes that darted from within partially drawn curtains and minds quick to judgment. As they trod into town the following day, the sun barely over the horizon and the chill of morning clinging to their breath in faint clouds, heads turned and tongues began their dance of rumors. The iron tang of black coffee drifted from the boarding house, mingled with the tempting smell of frying bacon. The normalcy of it all rubbed harshly against the storm brewing around them. Eleanor walked beside Caleb, chin held high, the hem of her faded blue dress brushing the dust. Beneath her skirts, her knees trembled, but she willed her steps to remain even. Caleb's presence at her side was like a solid wall. She could feel the warmth of him even without touching. Every so often, his hand hovered at the small of her back, not quite touching, but near enough that she could have leaned into it and let him carry some of her weight. A crowd gathered near the sheriff's office, a somber reminder of the gallows that loomed like a sinister shadow promise, dark against the brightening sky. The rough-hewn beam still bore the scars of weather and past hangings. Eleanor's stomach twisted. For a moment, she could almost feel the phantom roughness of a rope against her throat. Caleb shifted slightly closer, as if he could sense the direction of her thoughts. There, Reed stood with his broad chest puffed out, like a peacock with plumage of malice. His badge gleamed dully in the morning light. He sneered at Eleanor, letting his gaze linger just long enough to feel like a touch she wanted to scrub away. Then it slid to Caleb with contempt, born from fear of losing his grip on power. "She's a murderess. You think standing with an outlaw gives you any right to protest?" Reed spat, his words venom intended to burn. Spittle glistened at the corner of his mouth, his voice slicing through the murmurs like a whip crack. Caleb, unyielding, stepped between Reed and Eleanor, his frame a barrier against the sheriff's tainted words. The worn leather of his coat brushed her bodice as he moved, and Eleanor caught the scent of dust and pine from his collar. "I'd rather be an outlaw who seeks the truth than a sheriff hiding behind lies." The crowd buzzed with reaction, an uneasy beehive stirred. Some snarled agreement with Reed, faces twisted with long-fed fear. But others dared to hope, their eyes reflecting a question long kept at bay by terror. What if everything they'd been told was wrong? Reed's eyes narrowed, his facade cracking under the pressure of Caleb's unrelenting stare. A vein pulsed at his temple, but he wielded authority like a whip, turning to the crowd, his voice rising. These two deserve no place amongst decent folk. Eleanor could feel the heat of public judgment flaring, building, a combustible blend of injustice and hearsay. It licked at her skin, made the back of her neck prickle. She gripped Caleb's arm, fingers curling into the worn fabric of his sleeve, feeling the taut tension beneath his skin, the coiled strength of him. The contact steadied her even as it set her heart racing. She knew they couldn't wait. It was time to reveal the truth and burn through the lies with the flame of justice. Caleb's arm flexed beneath her hand, but he didn't pull away. For a brief moment, his fingers shifted back, brushing lightly over hers as if to say, "I've got you." Then together, they retreated, the weight of societal scorn resting heavy upon their shoulders like a physical thing, but not before whispers of change began their silent crawl through the crowd. A young mother clutched her child closer, yet her gaze followed Eleanor not with hatred, but with doubt. An old rancher spat in the dust, eyes narrowed, not at them, but at Reed. Sweat beaded Caleb's brow as he found the ledgers, hidden deep within the stacks. The barn was silent again, save for the occasional whinny of a restless horse and the soft scrape of leather against wood as he moved the horseshoes aside. Eleanor held the lantern high, arm aching, casting flickering shadows that danced with anticipation across the hay bales and rafters above. "Here." "This is the evidence we need," Caleb said, his voice etched with grim determination. He handed her a worn, leather-bound ledger. The cover was smooth in spots from handling, the edges rough and flaking. The truth harbored within its pages was more precious than gold. The leather felt unexpectedly warm against her palms, as if absorbing the heat of their resolve. "There's still Reed's men," Eleanor reminded, fingers tightening around the book. The thought of the sheriff's enforcers, men with dead eyes and easy trigger fingers, stilled her voice to a whisper. The risk was monumental, Reed's fury palpable even in his absence, like a storm waiting just beyond the ridge. But Caleb only nodded, the severity of the task mirrored in the tightness of his jaw. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, catching the lantern light. "I'll go to the circuit judge myself. You need to leave town, Eleanor." "With these in our hands, Reed won't stand a chance, but I won't put you in harm's way any longer." A stab of emotion tightened Eleanor's throat, sharp and unexpected. The thought of him riding out alone, carrying both their futures in his saddlebag, made her chest ache. She would not abandon him to face the wolves alone. "I'm not running. If you're willing to risk your life, then so am I." The words surprised even her with their steadiness. They hung in the cool barn air, solid and immovable. A pause hung in the air between them, the temperature shifting with the weight of unspoken fidelity. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards, as if the world itself held its breath. Caleb's gaze softened, the hard angles of his face easing. His lips parted to voice words that had long lain dormant, buried beneath layers of stoic resolve. "You've always been the only home I've ever known, Eleanor. I didn't expect you to ever risk that for me." Heat crawled up her neck, those simple words lodging deep. Home. Once, home had meant her brother's laughter, a narrow bed at Miss May's, the clatter of little boots in her classroom. Now it folded itself around the image of this man, standing before her with his heart laid bare in his quiet, unpolished way. "I don't know how to be saved," she admitted, voice tinged with honesty and a burgeoning realization. Her fingers traced the edge of the ledger absently. "I only know I can't face this without you." His hand lifted, hesitated, then came to rest, light as a breath, against her cheek. The pad of his thumb brushed just beneath her eye, as if to chase away a tear that hadn't quite fallen. The warmth of his palm seeped into her skin, steadying the slight tremor in her jaw. Their resolve solidified in the shared silence. An indelible promise formed beneath the canopy of stars visible through the barn's rickety roof. Through the gaps, tiny pricks of light shone down on them, cold and distant, yet strangely reassuring. For a long moment, they simply stood there, her cheek cupped in his roughened palm, his breath stirring a loose curl at her temple, neither willing to shatter the fragile peace with speech. Their plan unfurled with the dawn, bolstered by the cool morning air that spoke of untapped courage. The sky blushed pink, then gold at the edges, and dew glistened on the grass like scattered coins. Together, they made for Silver Canyon, where the circuit judge sat in impartial judgment, the seat of jurisdiction away from Reed's long shadow. The ride through the canyon was treacherous, the path narrow and hemmed by towering cliffs that stood mute testament to the passage of time. Loose stones skittered away beneath their horses' hooves, falling into unseen depths below. The air smelled of damp rock and sun-warmed dust, of juniper and sage crushed under iron shoes. But Eleanor rode side by side with Caleb, her faith carried in her heart, her decision unwavering. There were stretches of silence where the only sounds were the creak of saddles and the soft snort of the horses. In those quiet spaces, she became hyper-aware of the rhythm of Caleb's breathing, the way his shoulders moved with each inhale. Once, when her mare stumbled slightly on a loose stone, His hand shot out, fingers closing briefly over her forearm to steady her. Leather brushed wool, his grip was firm, his voice low when he spoke. Easy there. It was unclear whether he meant the horse or her. At night, when they camped beneath a canopy of stars, they shared coffee boiled black and bitter over a small fire, the steam curling into the chill air. Caleb shrugged out of his coat and, after a moment's hesitation, laid it over her shoulders while she stared at the flames. "You'll freeze," she protested weakly, fingers curling into the worn wool. It smelled of him, of smoke, leather, and something purely Caleb. "I've known colder nights," he replied. "Besides, you shake like a leaf when you're tired." She hadn't realized she was. Heat rose to her cheeks at the realization that he noticed such small things about her. When she lay down later, wrapped in a thin blanket with his coat tucked tightly around her shoulders, she slept with her face turned toward where he sat keeping watch, his silhouette a dark, reassuring line against the dim stars. When the gavel finally fell in the judge's chambers, it was not with finality, but with justice that reverberated louder than thunder. The room smelled faintly of ink and old paper, sunlight filtering through high windows to pool on the worn floorboards. Reed's deceit laid bare, his hold over Willow Creek shattered. Caleb and Eleanor's truth a beacon piercing the fog of corruption. The sound of the gavel echoed in Eleanor's bones, loosening something tight inside her chest. Her knees nearly gave beneath her. She steadied herself on the back of the wooden chair before her. A quill scratched somewhere, the mundane noise at odds with the enormity of the moment. Caleb's confession was less punctuated by exuberant celebration than by quiet acknowledgement of redemption found in the eyes of another. His shoulders, always held as if waiting for a blow, dropped nearly an inch. As they stood side by side, hands brushed in the solemnity of the judge's office, the delicate contact sending a familiar shiver through her. For a heartbeat, her fingers curled around his, and he answered with a gentle squeeze, as if anchoring them both. Words rose, imperative and inevitable. "Stay with me, Eleanor." He had faced the judge without flinching, admitted to what he'd done and what he hadn't, but now his voice held a tremor of uncertainty that she'd never heard before. She turned, studying the lines weather and regret had etched into his face. In his eyes, she saw not the outlaw the town had feared, but the man who had loosened her ropes with hands that shook ever so slightly, who had turned his coat into a blanket around her shoulders. She met his gaze, a smile ghosting across her lips and banishing the last vestiges of doubt. "We stay together, come what may." Their triumph was met with cautious acceptance by the town, some sneering, some casting their lot with gratitude in their eyes, their hoarded courage ignited by the couple's defiance. Children peered around their mothers' skirts at Caleb, curiosity tangling with the remnants of fear. Miss May pressed a warm loaf of bread into Eleanor's hands without a word, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The months that followed wove a tapestry of change, fields rich with crops, corn tassels whispering in the late summer wind, children spilling out of the rebuilt schoolhouse Eleanor taught in once more, their laughter ringing like bells across the yard. Chalk dust again scented the air inside those walls, this time sweet instead of bitter. Caleb a steady presence beside her, repairing desks with sure hands, mending a broken fence post out back, teaching a lanky boy to handle a skittish colt with patience instead of force. In the evenings, when the last child had gone and the golden light slanted low through the windows, Caleb would wait at the doorway, hat in hand. Sometimes he'd step inside to help her sweep, the two of them moving in quiet tandem, bristles whispering against the floor. Their shoulders would brush as they passed, and it felt, for all the world, like the most natural thing. A family found, not by blood but by bond, stronger than the chains of injustice that had sought to bind them. On a brisk autumn day, with leaves a riot of color against the endless sky, Caleb and Eleanor stood in a garden nurtured by love and toil. The air carried the mingled scents of turned earth, drying leaves, and the faint sweetness of late apples. Eleanor brushed dirt from her hands. The cool grains stuck beneath her fingernails and straightened, feeling the comfortable ache of a day's work in her back. The barn, now reclaimed by nature and time, cradled the melody of wind through its rafters. Vines had begun to creep up one side, softening the hard lines of weathered wood. The ghosts of that long night seemed to have faded, replaced by the lowing of cattle in a distant pasture and the distant, unexpected sound of a fiddle from town. "You've found your place," Caleb said, his words a quiet benediction. He leaned against the fence post, arms folded loosely, watching her with an expression that held more tenderness than he'd ever voice outright. The breeze lifted the loose hairs at her neck, and his fingers twitched, as if tempted to smooth them back. Eleanor turned, smiling as sunlight kissed their haven with warmth, turning the copper strands in her hair to fire. "And my people, Caleb. Our people." He swallowed at that, a small movement she almost missed. She crossed the short distance between them, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her boots delicate as breaking parchment, their hands entwined, fingers dancing in a soft ballet of silent promises. His grip was firm but careful, thumb stroking once across the back of her hand, a thoughtless, intimate gesture that made her heart lurch. The journey had borne its trials, yet beneath the cool canopy of autumn skies, they had forged something unbreakable. The roughness of his palm against her own, the familiar weight of his presence at her side. These had become as much a part of her life as the schoolhouse bell or the morning sun over the pines. In the distance, the clarion call of laughter echoed, the high, bright peals of children at play near the creek, a reminder of hope's constancy. The legacy of their choices took root, contributing to the fragile web of community and love. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid Caleb now nodded in greeting. Men who had looked through Eleanor now tipped their hats. Caleb tilted his head skyward, where sunlight and promise alike wrote their stories upon the canvas of limitless blue. A gust of wind swept through the garden, carrying with it the crisp scent of oncoming winter and the faint, comforting odor of wood smoke from their stovepipe. "Every sunrise, a new beginning with you," he murmured, a vow sealed by time and truth. The words were simple, but she felt the weight of every morning he hadn't believed he'd live to see in them. Eleanor met his gaze, a timeless reflection of kinship and home. She stepped closer until the front of her bodice brushed lightly against the rough wool of his shirt and rested her forehead gently against his chest. His arms came around her slowly, reverently, as if he still wondered whether he had the right to hold something so dear. She could hear the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, a quiet, reassuring drum. Together, they embraced the dawn each day that followed, the past's shadows quelled in favor of a future bright and just, their tale as timeless as the frontier they called their own. And in the small, ordinary moments, the shared coffee at sunup, the way his hand found hers as they walked the dusty road into town, their love deepened, not with grand declarations, but with the steady, enduring tenderness of two souls who had finally, undeniably come home.